JJ Jinx!
Truck Stop Knives!
This is JJ Jinx with Truck Stop Knives, and I wanted to do a video about knife collecting and the general aspects of it. So, as a collector of anything, what appeals to collections is a balance between completeness, variation, and, well, you have to consider expense too. So when it comes to knives, you have so many options. There are all kinds of different types, different companies, different variations within a single type of knife, um, and that's really good. You have there's something for everybody. For example, if you look through Spyderco's catalog, you will find hundreds and hundreds of knives, and a lot of them are really similar, just slight variations. That's one of the reasons why Spyderco is a great company, is because if you want a knife that really fits you, fits your hand, feels good, feels solid, like an extension of your own body, chances are they make something that'll do that for you. They do follow market forces, so the most popular knives, of which there are dozens, uh, tend to be made in greater numbers, and then there are the ones that everybody talks about and everyone likes. And even within those, there are additional variations, like the ones I mentioned: scale materials, blade steel, blade type, but it can get very expensive. Um, and when it comes to that kind of collectability, I don't know. I like to strike a balance. And Spyderco, which has great knives, I'd rather just have a few of the ones I really like, and then find something that more fits what I'm looking for. And this is why the Ozark Trail Walmart knives are such an attractive line of knives. It's because they're cheap. I mean, you can get the entire collection right now for most likely under $100. And so you get that sense of completeness. And the catalog grows. Hopefully they keep making more different types, and it's like every year, oh, they got more, I gotta go out and find them. And then if you're like me, you gotta find them out in the wild. So you could order them online, or you can just find them in some random Walmart somewhere. And that could be an adventure, and it has been for me. But in the end, the drawback to the Walmart Ozark Trail knives is that they're so ubiquitous. You can find them literally anywhere, and I've had trouble finding some of them. But then it's like you complete it and you're kind of done. So there's also this sense of accomplishment of completing the collection. And for some people, that could be like chasing the dragon. You might never complete it. I've considered collecting Barlow knives or Texas toothpicks. And the problem is there's just too damn many. You'll never complete a collection. So your options are: you can narrow your focus to say, I only want to collect this type of Barlow or this type of Texas toothpick, or what have you, and go from there. So I've always, yeah, it's a constant struggle. It's a constant growing collection, a growing need and want. But I might have stumbled upon something recently that could fill all of my needs and wants, and at a relatively low expense. And when I say stumbled upon it, it's about as literal as you can get. I mean, I didn't really, okay, maybe not. I didn't actually trip over anything, but it was this Camillus Electrician's knife that just kind of fell on my lap. Let's have a closer look. This is the Camillus Electrician's knife. I'm here to talk to you about the taxonomy, anatomy, terminology, however you want to put it. I know taxonomy is for plants, anatomy is for animals, terminology is what we're talking about. So on the left here, you'll see this piece of metal sticking out. That is called the pail. It is basically a hook to put this onto a nail on the wall, or maybe hook it to a utility belt, something like that. And it's called that because it resembles the handle to a bucket or a pail, wherein it's kind of horseshoe shaped, and I'll show you that later. Then we have the main pin, or the pivot pin, which locks all of the springs and liners into place. And then the scale to liner pins, which are smaller, and you'll see there's variation in that. And here's an example of one type of variation with the actual pail. So here, the pail on the top example is more towards the edge of the knife, and we call that a shallow pail. And then when it's moved further in, we call that a deep pail. The number of scale to liner pins can also vary. In the top example, there are 3 of them. And then when you go down one, there's just 2, and there's another example where there's just 1, and there's another one where there's none. And then there's also the finish. In some examples, the liner and springs are stacked together and then ground after being assembled to give this nice flush look. But on the right in orange, you'll see that sometimes they just pile them together and leave them that way. So the finish is uneven and it's a little uglier, but still functional. And yeah, you got some gaps and some unevenness. And like I said, it still works. And the tang stamping, we see a lot of variation here. In one example, we see the logo is underlined and everything is in block lettering. And in another example, we see the underline again, the block lettering again, but the U, S, and A, which kind of hard to see here, is actually spaced apart a bit more. In another example, we see that the logo is underlined, it's block lettering, but the lines are overall thinner. In a fourth example, we see that the logo is underlined but also italicized, and the US and A get periods. And in the fifth example, the logo gets a double line in a serif font. Now, if we put all of these together, the underlined block lettering stamp variant has a deep pale location, 3 scale to liner pins, and a finished back. The underlined block lettering with the USA spaced further apart also has a deep pale, 2 scale to liner pins, and also a finished back. And when we have a look at the block lettering that's a little thinner, it has a shallow pale with only 1 scale to liner pin and a piled back that's unfinished. The italicized logo comes also with a shallow pale, 0 scale to liner pins, and again, a piled finish. And finally, the double-lined serif font logo has a shallow pale location, again, 0 scale to liner pins, and a piled back finish. Now, there is one more variation that I need to talk about, and that's this one, the TL-29 scale stamp. If your knife has this stamp on its scale, TL-29 stands for tool, linesman, number 29. If you're familiar with military vernacular, then you know that this is the way that the US military classifies tools, food, clothing, boots, everything. This sort of like classification. It's a tool. It's for linesmen, and it's tool number 29. This means that your knife was actually government issued and possibly saw action because Camillus made knives ordered by the military starting in World War I by the commissioned by the Department of War, as it was called at the time, and then all the way until through the Vietnam War, where it was called the Department of Defense, and well, that would be a really cool thing to see. JJ Jinx, why are you talking about all this? Well, remember when I said I kind of stumbled upon a knife? It turns out when I bought my house, I found one in my basement. Now, I initially mistook it as a Barlow because of the large bolster, but I sent some photos to my buddy Tristan Barnett, and he immediately knew what it was. He said, "No, my friend, that is a Camillus Electrician's knife, and it could be pretty old, and it could be worth a lot." And I was like, okay, wow. And I've been busy moving and unpacking and all that stuff ever since. So I never really looked up anything about it until just recently. And that's when I compiled all that information with the help of the internet. And it turns out that this knife has a pretty discrete number of variations, and they're not too expensive to find. And their rarity is, I don't know, they made tons of these things. So this could be a fun thing to collect, and they're pretty solid, good, well-made knives. So you have your normal kind of blade here. The other blade is kind of interesting because, and I really got to pry it up because this thing is rusty. I mean, it is in rough shape, very used, but still solid. So the other blade has a flathead screwdriver here at the top, and then it's just a cutting blade. But the interesting thing about it is that there's actually a liner lock on it. If you can see that little curved piece of metal here. And the other one is a simple slip joint. And that makes it rather unique as well, in my opinion. Ugh. So, the Camillus Electrician's knife. Found it in the basement. It came with the house. So coming back to this chart that I made of the different variations, where does this knife fit? This is the one that I just showed you, and you can see how rusty it is, but here are the characteristics. It has the shallow pail, 0 scale to liner pins, just that one pivot pin, some very rusted blades. So what about the tang stamp? Well, oh, right. Let me back up here. And the back finish is piled, so it's not smoothed over in the back. My bad. It is not a TL-29. It is not government issued, but that doesn't mean it's a bad knife. Still very solid construction. They don't make them like they used to. So the tank stamp, well, even if I look really close, it's so corroded, scratched. I don't know what I'm looking at. So I'm going to have to send this out to Tristan Barnett to have it cleaned up, and maybe, hopefully, that tang stamp can be preserved because it is one of these two variations down here. Either it has the underlined italicized Camillus logo, or it has the double-lined serif font, both of which have shallow pails, 0 scale to liner pins with piled finishes. It's one of those two. I'd like to thank the user MTDS from the website allaboutpocketknives.com, who posted all of this information and the photos in their forum. And looking at the people who replied to this posting, a lot of people came forward and was like, hey, I got a pocket knife from my father or my grandfather, and it has that stamp on it. And I wonder if they had it while they were in the war. Or there were people who posted who actually worked at the Camillus factory because it was open for quite a long time. It was founded in 1876, and it didn't close down due to bankruptcy until 2007. Now, I don't know if they made these specific electrician's knives that entire time, but one of the posters described how the reduction in the number of pins and the absence of the step to smooth out the back were put into place basically as a cost-saving measure over time. The number of steps to manufacture one of these was reduced, the amount of time to manufacture one of these was reduced, the amount of materials going into it was reduced. And so this, based on what that poster said, this could be a very late model knife. Now, as to when it was manufactured exactly, I'm not entirely sure. There's not a timestamp on it or a lot number or anything like that. I'll probably have to do some more digging to find out the details, but that makes sense to me that the fit and finish sort of diminished over time in order to accommodate expanded manufacturing, reducing costs. And Camillus is still kind of around and still making knives. Their, excuse me, their brand was sold off to a larger parent company, and the manufacturing now takes place in China under the Camillus name. And as they say, they don't make them like they used to. This has been JJ Jinx, Truck Stop Knives.